There's some big news coming from the Supreme Court. Chief Justice John Roberts just made a rare statement regarding President Trump's call to impeach Judge James Boasberg, who has temporarily blocked deportations under the Alien Enemies Act. It's definitely a significant moment. Earlier today, Trump posted on Truth Social expressing his frustration with Judge Boasberg. He claimed that this judge, along with many others he considers crooked, should be impeached. This was just days after Boasberg tried to halt deportations. And it's interesting to note that the Trump administration didn't comply with his order to turn around 2 flights that had already taken off. During a heated hearing yesterday, the Justice Department argued that they didn't have to follow the judge's oral order, which Boasberg clearly disagreed with. In response to all of this, Chief Justice Roberts made a powerful statement saying, "For more than 2 centuries, it has been established that impeachment is not an appropriate response to disagreement concerning a judicial decision. The normal appellate review process exists for that purpose." It's a brief but impactful statement, pushing back against Trump's remarks and reminding everyone how things are supposed to work in our legal system. So there I was, catching up on the latest news, and I learned this wild story. A justice from the United States Supreme Court, one of the 9 people who help protect our Constitution, just got up and walked out during a live event while President Trump was speaking. Can you picture that? Right in front of the cameras and everyone watching, they simply stood up, turned their back, and left. It's honestly hard to believe they said that out loud. Now, before that dramatic exit, things were getting heated in court over a written order that they didn't follow. This was interesting because their main argument was that Trump has broad executive authority regarding foreign affairs, which is quite a claim. But here's the kicker. This case isn't just about Trump's use of executive power. It's about how far he and his lawyers think they can go without the court stepping in. Judge Boasberg, who seemed to have the support of some really high-ranking justices, was trying to make a point about the importance of this situation. There have been so many discussions lately about whether we're facing a constitutional crisis. People debated if it even mattered that they weren't complying with a court order. But here comes Chief Justice John Roberts, stepping in and saying it's not too soon to take this seriously. He doesn't usually dive into the political drama unless absolutely necessary, but he felt the need to remind the president that you can't just think about impeaching a district judge just because you don't agree with a ruling. It's just one of those moments that felt like it shook the ground underneath American democracy, not in a way that political scientists will analyze in a few decades, but in an instant that'll forever be part of our history. So, apparently there was no scheduling issue or sudden sickness that made them walk out. They took that step because the president was right there at the podium, openly trashing the Constitution of the United States, which is pretty wild since that very document is what gives the Supreme Court its power and legitimacy. This isn't just some rumor floating around that the administration is trying to deny or gossip from anonymous sources. It's pretty remarkable, really. While it's about a specific case, it's much more significant than that. Some folks have been debating whether we're really facing a constitutional crisis or if there's a valid disagreement. They're dissecting the difference between a written order and a verbal one, trying to decide if it's even time to be concerned. John Roberts clearly thinks otherwise. He rarely jumps into political discussions unless absolutely necessary, but here he is saying, no, it's not too soon. I'm the one who oversees one of the 3 branches set up by the Constitution, so I'm saying this loud and clear. Back off, Mr. President. That kind of stance really catches your attention. So, Donald Trump recently made some pretty bold remarks about a judge. He labeled this judge as a radical left lunatic and called him a troublemaker and agitator, claiming he was appointed by Barack Obama and wasn't actually elected. Trump went so far as to say that this judge, along with many others he considers crooked, should be impeached. It's honestly hard to believe he said that out loud. Now, before diving deeper, it's worth remembering what Trump said just a few days ago when he was at the Justice Department addressing a different judge. He mentioned this notion of judicial resistance, suggesting that it's causing a full-blown meltdown in the legal world. It feels like we're not just in a political spat. It's like we're witnessing the beginning of a significant institutional collapse in America. It's interesting to note that Chief Justice John Roberts recently pointed out that for more than 2 centuries, it has been understood that impeachment isn't the right response to simply disagreeing with a court's decision. Isn't it ironic how this whole situation is playing out? Let's picture the scene inside that room. The tension is thick enough to cut with a knife. Trump is up there doing what he does best, rolling through his speech with an energy that fills the room, but this time he's going off script like nobody's business. He's not just going after his usual targets like the media or any Democrats. No, this time he's going straight for the judiciary. He claims that his presidential powers put him above federal judges, that no one can block his agenda, and that the Constitution doesn't really apply to his decisions on things like immigration, trade, or national security. Essentially, he's telling everyone that he is the law itself. And sitting there amidst a crowd of dignitaries is a Supreme Court justice, someone whose life has been dedicated to understanding and defending that very Constitution. They took an oath to protect it against all enemies, foreign or domestic, and here they are, witnessing the president treat it like it's nothing more than a piece of trash. Then in a moment that speaks volumes, the justice makes their move. There's no grandstanding or shouting. It's all very quiet and powerful. They simply stand up, collect themselves, and walk out, all while Trump continues speaking. The cameras catch this quiet exit, and the room can't help but take notice. This image of a Supreme Court justice walking away from a president who's undermining the Constitution is striking. It's a statement that no spin can cover up. The judiciary is taking a stand saying, "We won't be part of this wrecking ball." Justices usually keep their cool, avoiding drama, steering clear of controversy, and staying away from the political squabbles that the other branches thrive on. They rely on being seen as neutral, above the fray. So, when one of them decides to walk out on a sitting president, the message is loud and clear. When something goes seriously wrong, it's like firing off a flare gun in a dark theater. Everyone needs to take notice. Just when you think things can't get any more intense, the Chief Justice of the United States steps in. John Roberts, who usually keeps his words to a minimum on political matters, decided to break his silence. This wasn't just some casual remark to a friendly reporter or a vague comment at a legal gathering. This was a clear public response to the president's actions. In a statement that balanced judicial decorum with directness, Roberts asserted that for over 200 years, impeachment has never been about merely disagreeing with a judicial decision. He pointed out that there's a process in place when a president doesn't like a ruling. It's called an appeal. Instead of attacking the judge personally, calling for their removal, or threatening the very independence of the judiciary, the proper course is to appeal. Roberts may have been speaking in a sort of code, but it's easy to understand. Essentially, he was telling the president, "You're stepping way out of line and need to cut it out." When even the cautious Chief Justice decides he can't stay quiet anymore, it really shows just how far the guardrails are being pushed. Now, the target of Trump's ire is a federal judge named James Boasberg. Boasberg is not just any judge. He's a district judge in Washington, D.C., appointed by Obama, and he's been involved in cases that challenge various policies from the Trump administration. Rather than resorting to an appeal or discussing legal merits, Trump chose to label Judge Boasberg a lunatic. Yes, a lunatic. The President of the United States stood up and publicly used that term to describe a sitting federal judge. But he didn't stop there. He went as far as demanding Boasberg's impeachment, not because Boasberg broke any laws or acted corruptly, but simply because the judge made rulings Trump disagreed with. That's a fundamental misunderstanding of impeachment, perhaps even a willful one. Impeachment is meant for severe offenses like treason or high crimes, not just a simple difference of opinion. It's honestly hard to believe that Trump attempted to use impeachment as a way to intimidate judges who didn't make rulings he liked. By suggesting the removal of a judge, he's basically signaling to every federal judge in the country that if they don't rule in his favor, he could try to ruin them. That's not how the justice system should work. What's really unsettling is the legal theory his team is pushing during these legal challenges. It's pretty astonishing in its ambition. They argue that in certain areas like national security, immigration enforcement, and trade policy, the presidential power should be viewed as almost absolute. These aren't small issues. They affect a lot of aspects of daily life in America. According to them, when the president makes moves in these areas, the courts should just step back and leave it alone, claiming that the foundational principle of judicial review, which originated from Marbury versus Madison, shouldn't apply simply because the president says so. Sure, there's a history of executive discretion, especially in foreign affairs, but what Trump is suggesting goes way beyond that. It's getting close to a sort of legal immunity, where the constitutional checks and balances don't function. This kind of argument is what had a Supreme Court justice walking out in disbelief and made John Roberts actually issue a rare statement. It's not just a typical policy disagreement. It feels like a full-on attack on the concept of limited government. And then there's the buzz in legal circles about the recent exchange involving Judge Boasberg, which raised eyebrows everywhere. During the hearings, there was a real back and forth on the limits of judicial authority. At one point, Boasberg reportedly pushed back hard against the sweeping claims of executive power by saying something like, "We don't care, we'll do what we want." Now, those words might sound like a judge admitting to lawlessness without the complete picture, but context is key. He wasn't saying that the judiciary can operate above the law. He was strongly resisting the notion that the executive should have unchecked power. So, the president thinks he can simply say he's immune to any judicial checks. It's honestly hard to believe he went there. But what's fascinating is that he was actually standing up for a really important principle, that courts are supposed to check the power of the executive branch. His statement showed a solid commitment to maintaining our systems, not some kind of judicial tyranny. Yet in today's political environment, it's kind of crazy how that crucial difference is getting completely lost. The president's supporters are already twisting those words around, trying to paint the judiciary as a bunch of out-of-control activists who openly disregard limits. But the truth is, the judge was all about keeping those limits in place, whereas the president seems bent on erasing them. Right now, everyone's holding their breath because the Supreme Court has a mountain of cases ahead that are going to tackle these very questions. There are significant disputes making their way through the system, all circling around one central issue. How much power does this president actually have? Some cases are looking into the broad tariffs Trump rolled out using emergency powers. And at the heart of it is the question of whether he can just change American trade policy without really involving Congress. Then there are the cases about birthright citizenship, where Trump tried to issue executive orders to stop automatically granting citizenship to kids born on American soil whose parents are undocumented. This directly goes against the clear wording of the 14th Amendment, which guarantees that right. Plus, we have issues around mass deportations, where the administration is using military resources and claiming wartime laws to kick individuals out with hardly any due process. All these cases are heading straight for the Supreme Court, and the justices will have to determine, time and again, where the boundaries of presidential power actually lie. Here's the tricky spot the conservative majority on the court finds themselves in. 6 of the justices were appointed by Republican presidents. 3 of them, Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and Barrett, were actually handpicked by Trump. They tend to lean conservative and probably agree with many of the policies the administration promotes, but they're also aware of their role as institutionalists, and they care deeply about maintaining the court's long-term legitimacy. It's quite a mixed bag when it comes to the Supreme Court right now. If they agree with every move Trump makes, they'll end up being remembered as the group that dismantled the separation of powers, definitely not a title anyone would want. Meanwhile, sticking by him in major cases could really solidify those worries critics have. They might just see them as partisan players in fancy robes instead of independent jurists. On the flip side, if they go against him, they'll be hit with the whole wrath of the MAGA crowd, who will hurl accusations of being deep state traitors for turning on the very person who appointed them. John Roberts is especially sensitive to how the court is perceived. He's been putting in the effort for years to show that the Supreme Court isn't just another political machine, insisting that their decisions stem from the law and not personal biases. But with the attack on Judge Boasberg and the recent walkout, that's become an even bigger uphill battle. The sense of impartiality is quickly fading as a president seeks to turn the court into a tool for partisan gain, backed by a base that demands unwavering loyalty. Constitutional experts aren't sugarcoating the situation either. There's been a notable article floating around from Stanford that's caught the attention of many in the academic world, and its points are quite unsettling. It suggests we're not just facing a one-off constitutional crisis that will pass. We're actually in a deeper state of constitutional rot. This means we're gradually losing our norms, where every new breach makes it easier for the next one to happen, normalizing what should be considered abnormal and undermining the institutions that are meant to stand strong against it all. Trump isn't just bending rules here and there, he's reshaping the very fundamentals of what it means for a president to operate. When he attacks judges without facing any blowback, it sets a precedent that makes further attacks more likely. Each time he claims his authority surpasses judicial review and his supporters cheer him on, it chips away at the expectation of respect for the courts. He's essentially teaching a whole new generation of politicians and voters to view the Constitution as more of a guideline than an absolute rule. What's even more concerning is the eventual boomerang effect that's bound to follow. Trump won't be president forever, and before long, a Democrat will take over the Oval Office, inheriting the powers that Trump has effectively claimed for the executive branch. So if he sets the precedent that a president can just declare emergencies and impose tariffs, that could open up a whole new can of worms. Looking ahead, it's interesting to think about how a future Democratic president could take advantage of the same powers being used today, like imposing carbon taxes or climate mandates, since Congress isn't stepping in. If Trump sets a precedent of ignoring judicial orders related to deportations, then who's to say a future president wouldn't just disregard rulings on things like gun confiscation or healthcare mandates? It's a slippery slope, and the reality is that these authoritarian powers used by one side could easily become tools for the other. What's concerning is how our political discussions seem so focused on winning the next news cycle that the long-term consequences are almost completely overlooked. This is why the walkout in Chief Justice Roberts' statements are so significant. The judiciary is really trying to hold its ground as a co-equal branch of government. Roberts isn't just standing up for Judge Boasberg out of personal affection or some hidden agenda. He's defending the principle that judges must be able to make tough calls without facing political backlash. When the justice walked out, it wasn't about tax policy or health care. It was a stance for the Constitution itself. They made a point to refuse to participate in an event where the founding document was being publicly undermined. It's a very defensive move by a branch of government that feels under attack, almost like an immune system gearing up to tackle a serious infection. Yet here's the unsettling reality. The court doesn't have much power to enforce its own decisions. As Alexander Hamilton pointed out in Federalist 78, the judiciary lacks both the purse and the sword. It has no army and no budget, relying entirely on the willingness of other branches and the public to follow its rulings. If a president with a sizable backing from the populace decides to ignore a Supreme Court decision, there's not much the court can do about it. The U.S. Marshals are supposed to enforce federal court orders, but they take orders from the executive branch. So if the president tells them to step aside, it's like the enforcement mechanism just disappears, leaving us with a hollow victory and a constitutional gap. So where does all this tension take us? Eventually, the Supreme Court will have to make decisions on major cases involving tariffs, immigration, and emergency powers. Those decisions could either reinforce or challenge the constitutional limits we have in place. Thinking about the situation, it's hard not to feel a bit uneasy about the way things are heading with the presidency. The way things have been going, you'd think accepting a ruling against him would be something Trump would graciously do. But honestly, I can't picture that happening. He seems more likely to turn on the justices, throw personal insults their way, and rally his supporters with claims of being unfairly treated by a deep state that's trampling on the people's will. And then the real drama starts. Imagine if a court says a certain deportation policy is illegal. Would the administration really stop deportation flights, or would they just come up with some clever excuse to keep going? Or if a court rules against a tariff regime, would the Customs and Border Protection computers be updated to stop collecting those fees? Or would compliance be dragged out until the ruling feels irrelevant? We're looking at a serious standoff reminiscent of what the framers of our Constitution feared, a president bent on holding on to as much power as possible, clashing with a judiciary that's striving to hold him accountable. Now let's step back for a moment and think about what all this means for the average person who isn't deeply into constitutional law or glued to court dramas every day. The core idea of the American system is simple. No one person gets to be king. This whole revolution was about pushing back against unchecked power. Checks and balances were put in place to keep things moving at a steady pace, to ensure thoughtful discussion and prevent any one branch from overshadowing the others. For this system to work, everyone has to accept that losing in court is part of the game. Sure, the president can disagree with court decisions, he can voice his opinions or choose to appeal, but if he starts blurring the lines between criticism and intimidation, treating judges like enemies rather than neutral parties, that's when the whole system starts falling apart. When the president suggests that his ability to protect the nation means he can just ignore the courts, he's, whether he realizes it or not, setting the stage for authoritarianism. The essence of a constitutional democracy is that even the leader must follow the law, just like everyone else. If that leader believes he's above judicial review and can simply dismiss court orders, that undermines everything the system is supposed to stand for. After a fiery tweet from Trump, it almost seems like the law is just a set of suggestions for those without power. It's honestly hard to believe how much his supporters have embraced his attacks on judges, seeing them as a key part of his presidency. They actually voted for him because they want him to dismantle the system they view as corrupt and rigged against them. To these folks, Judge Boasberg isn't just a judge. He's an Obama appointee who wears a robe to hide his biases. When Trump labels him a lunatic and calls for his impeachment, the crowd roars in approval, believing they're witnessing a strong leader take on a shadowy group that supposedly controlled the country for years. Now, there's some real frustration mixed in here. The federal judiciary has definitely expanded its reach into policy. Judges occasionally overstep their bounds, and let's face it, the confirmation process is a chaotic mess. But tearing down judicial authority isn't the solution. That's like taking a bullet to the head of a patient rather than providing a cure. If you don't like a judge's ruling, the right move is to win elections, push for better judges, and make your case on appeal, not to threaten anyone who rules against you. As we face this ongoing battle over constitutional authority, it's important to think about what might happen next. The best case scenario, which honestly seems a bit naive at this point, is that the Supreme Court makes a decision against Trump, and he begrudgingly complies. Terrifying as it sounds, that means planes stop flying, tariffs get adjusted, and the system bends but doesn't break. We come out a little scarred, sure, but still intact. But that does require a level of restraint from Trump that he's never really demonstrated. Now let's talk about a much darker possibility. The court rules against Trump and he simply refuses to comply. This would take us back to a historical mess reminiscent of Marbury versus Madison, where the executive branch completely disregards the judicial branch. The situation we're facing right now really feels like it could spiral out of control. If the court makes a ruling and then the administration just asks everyone to enforce it, we could find ourselves grappling with a legitimacy crisis that we haven't seen since the Civil War. It's a tough choice we'd have to make between upholding the rule of law and accepting the reality of power. Then there's the possibility that the Supreme Court may, for a mix of reasons like shared beliefs and pressure, side with Trump in important cases. That would massively increase executive power and change the presidency into something far stronger and less restricted than it was ever meant to be back in 1787. And honestly, the long-term effects of that could be irreversible. All the drama with the walkout, Chief Justice Roberts' sharp response, and the backlash against Bowsher aren't different stories. They're all part of the same worrying pattern of decline in our system. The Supreme Court justice who walked out made it clear that they refuse to normalize the president's antics. They're standing up for their institution and showing they won't just sit back and let the Constitution be dismissed like it's no big deal. But here's the kicker. They can't do it alone. The outcome of this whole mess hinges on what happens beyond the courtroom. It really comes down to whether members of Congress, especially those in the Republican Party with ties to the administration, see the survival of the judicial branch as more vital than winning their next primary. It also relies on whether regular folks, no matter their political leanings, can grasp that the idea of judicial review is more important than any single policy win. In the end, it's about whether we still believe in being a nation of laws, or if we've quietly opted for a nation where a strong leader makes promises to take care of just a specific group. History is certainly watching us right now, and the chapter is being penned as we speak. The real question is whether this will end up being a story of resilience or one of downfall.